The Galactic Assembly Station orbited a neutron star, and the station itself was the size of a small moon, and every species that mattered had a seat inside it. 900 species, 4,000 years of galactic civilization. Delegations that breathed methane sat 3 rows from delegations that breathed nothing at all. The chamber was a cathedral built by committee, too many architectural traditions crammed into one space, like a church designed by every religion at the same time. Humanity had held a minor seat for 11 months. Row 874, back corner, near the ventilation ducts. Maddox's crew sat in that seat now, legs crossed, reading a 3-day-old copy of a newspaper he had printed from Earth's data archive because he liked the way paper felt. He was 58 years old. His suit was 15 years out of fashion. His hair had made peace with gravity a long time ago, and now just sort of existed on his head without ambition. He had the posture of a man waiting at a bus stop. He suspected had been decommissioned. The Yarathi High Imperator was speaking. Solvan Kether stood at the center of the assembly floor. 8 feet of crystalline exoskeleton that caught the light and threw it around the chamber like a chandelier made of knives. His voice came through the translation system as a deep, rolling thunder. But even without translation, the original sound was something that got into your ribs and stayed there. He was declaring war on Earth. It was, by galactic standards, a beautiful speech. The Yarathi had been doing this for millennia. The declaration was a ritual, a performance, a piece of theater designed to break the target species before the first ship ever fired. Kether spoke of the Yarathi Empire's reach. 914 conquered worlds. He spoke of fleets that darkened the skies of entire systems. He spoke of species that had resisted and were now entries in a biological archive, preserved in glass, studied by Yarathi children on school field trips. He described in detail what would happen to Earth: orbital bombardment of military installations, genetic cataloging of the surviving population, cultural submission archives. Humanity's art, music, and literature would be recorded, filed, and stored in a wing of the Imperial Museum, between the Delvani, extinct, formerly aquatic, and the Rule, extinct, formerly fond of poetry. The speech lasted 47 minutes. Every delegation watched. Not the Imperator. They had seen this before. They watched row 874. This was the part where the target species broke. The Cathani archives held recordings of every declaration in history, and the pattern was always the same. First, silence. Then the biological signs of terror: trembling, color change, involuntary fluid release in some of the less dignified species. Then the desperate counteroffer. Then the begging. The Delvani had wept so hard their gills clogged. The Rule had begun composing a surrender poem mid-session, which the Yarathi had framed. Maddox's crew turned a page of his newspaper. Lieutenant Priya Sengupta sat 1 seat behind him. She was 34, sharp-jawed, military attaché to the diplomatic mission. She had a degree in xenopolitical strategy and a minor in applied panic. Her hands were gripping her knees so hard, her knuckles had gone the color of old paper. She had understood every word of the Imperator's speech. The fleet numbers were real. The timelines were real. 72 hours from formal declaration to first orbital strike. Earth's combined space-capable military, 90 ships, most of them repurposed cargo haulers with guns bolted to the hull, would last approximately 11 minutes against the Yarathi vanguard alone. She was doing the math, and the math was doing her dirty. Crew was reading the crossword section. The Imperator finished. The chamber held its breath. 900 species, thousands of delegates, every eye and eye-equivalent organ turned toward the human section. Crew folded the newspaper, set it on his knee, reached into his jacket pocket. Sengupta watched his hand, expecting him to pull out the prepared response. A 3-page document drafted by Earth's Joint Diplomatic Council, approved by 4 governments, translated into Galactic Standard, and carefully worded to express firm but measured concern. He pulled out a cigarette. The lighter was a cheap steel thing, dented, the kind you'd find in a gas station in a town with 1 traffic light. It clicked twice before it caught. The flame was small and orange, and totally illegal on a station with atmospheric regulations strict enough to ban most forms of cooking. Crew inhaled, held it, let the smoke out slow. It curled past a sign that read, in 14 languages, "No atmospheric contaminants." The Bravari delegation, 3 rows up, began coughing through their filtration membranes. A Cathani monitor drone beeped twice, and then seemed to give up. The Imperator stared. Crew looked up at him the way a man looks at a waiter who has brought the wrong order, but it is not worth sending back. "You done?" he said. The translator converted this into Galactic Standard. Several delegations checked their devices, convinced of a malfunction. The Urathi envoy to Crew's left made a sound that might have been a gasp, or might have been a small mechanical failure in his exoskeleton. The Imperator said nothing. This was not in the script. Because that was long, Crew continued. He tapped Ash onto the armrest of his chair. I mean that respectfully. As feedback, you could lose the middle section, tighten up the genocide stuff. 47 minutes is a lot to ask of people. Sengupta closed her eyes. Her career was a living thing, and she could feel it dying. Does the human delegation wish to offer a formal response? The assembly moderator asked. It was a Thessi, a species made mostly of organized light. It flickered when it was uncomfortable. It was flickering now. Sure, Crew said. He stood, took another drag, looked at the Imperator the way a man looks at a parking ticket. Annoyed, unsurprised, already thinking about lunch. Earth acknowledges receipt of the Urathi Declaration of War, he said. We will review it internally and respond through appropriate channels within a reasonable time frame. The kind that has weight. Then the Bravari delegation started coughing again, and the moment cracked, and the assembly dissolved into the low hum of 900 species trying to figure out what they had just witnessed. Sengupta grabbed Crew's arm the moment they were in the corridor. Her grip was stronger than she meant it to be. Her voice was not. Do you understand what just happened in there? Tall guy declared war. I need coffee. Are those two things related? I don't think they have to be. Their fleet can glass Earth in 72 hours. 72. That's 3 days. You just told an empire that conquered 900 worlds to tighten up their genocide stuff. Crew stopped walking, looked at her. For a half-second, something moved behind his eyes. Not fear, not exactly, but the shadow of a thing that had once been fear before it got tired and sat down. Priya, he said. It caught the station's artificial light and hung between them like a question neither of them was going to answer. I've been through a federal audit. He walked on. The cigarette burned between his fingers, small and orange and running out of time, the way small and orange things do. Sengupta stood in the corridor and watched him go and tried to decide if she was working for a madman or something worse. Something worse, she decided. A madman would at least have the decency to be afraid. 48 hours after the declaration, Maddox's Crew became the most watched human being in galactic history, and he was using that attention to argue with a vending machine. The machine was Bravari designed, which meant it operated on a combination of bioluminescent input and what Crew could only describe as emotional sonar. You had to want the drink in a specific, resonant way, and Crew wanted coffee the way a drowning man wants air, which was apparently too aggressive for the machine's settings. I am not threatening you, he said to it. I'm placing an order. The machine pulsed an uncertain yellow. 3 delegations had sent junior attachés to observe him. They stood at the far end of the commissary, pretending to eat, watching him the way biologists watch an animal that has just done something unprecedented and potentially dangerous. The Salvari attaché was taking notes on a glass tablet. The Cathani monitor drone had been following crew for 16 hours and had developed what Sengupta suspected was a grudging curiosity. Nobody had ever not surrendered at this stage. The assembly's back channels were on fire. Species that hadn't spoken to each other in centuries were exchanging messages about the human in row 874 who had told the Yarathi Imperator to edit his speech. The Yarathi response came in the form of Subcommander Vesk. Vesk was young for a Yarathi. His exoskeleton still had the translucent quality of recent molting, and his movements had the precise, rehearsed energy of an officer who had memorized the manual, but had not yet learned which pages to ignore. He arrived at the human delegation's quarters, carrying a data cylinder the color of dried blood. Sengupta met him at the door. Her uniform was pressed, because pressing it was the only thing she could control. And she was holding on to control the way Crew held on to his cigarettes, constantly, and with the knowledge that it was killing her slowly. The surrender terms, Vesk said. He held out the cylinder the way you hand someone a bomb, carefully, with the understanding that what happened next was not his problem. Sengupta took it. Vesk left. She brought it to Crew, who was sitting in the quarter's only comfortable chair, which he had dragged from the bedroom to the main room to the window, because he liked to look at the neutron star while he thought. The star was a spinning fist of collapsed matter, and it threw light in pulses, and Crew found it soothing the way some people find rain soothing. The reminder that enormous things were always in the process of destroying themselves, and the universe did not particularly care. She set the cylinder on the table. Crew opened it. 47 pages, translated into English with the clinical precision of a species that had done this many times. The formatting was elegant. The content was extinction wearing a necktie. Section 1 through 7 covered military disarmament. Total. Every weapon, every ship, every satellite with offensive capability. Earth would be permitted a civil defense flotilla of no more than 12 unarmed vessels, subject to Yarathi inspection at any time. Section 8 through 15 covered population controls. Humanity would be capped at 4 billion. The current population exceeded that number. The document did not specify what would happen to the excess. It did not need to. Sections 16 through 22 covered genetic licensing. Humans would be required to submit biological samples for archival and improvement purposes. Reproduction beyond licensed parameters would be classified as a biological crime. Section 23 through 30 covered cultural submission. All human art, literature, music, scientific research, and religious texts would be collected, cataloged, and stored in the Imperial Archive. Humanity would be permitted to continue cultural production under Yarathi editorial oversight. Sengupta read over his shoulder. Her throat closed around something that was not a sound. Crew read all 47 pages. He read them the way he read everything, slowly, with the occasional pause to frown at a particular word choice, as though the document's greatest crime was its prose style. Then he picked up a pen, an actual ink pen, the kind he kept in his jacket next to the cigarettes, because Maddox Crew had been born in an era when people still signed things by hand, and he had never seen a reason to stop. He started making notes. Section 1, margin. No. Section 4, margin. Also no. Section 8, margin. You're out of your mind. Section 12, paragraph 3. which specified the surrender of all domestic animals for biological risk assessment. We're keeping our dogs. Non-negotiable. Section 16. Margin. This is the most unhinged thing I've read since my second divorce filing. Section 23. Subsection C, which required the destruction of all human musical instruments not approved by Urathi cultural authorities. Absolutely not. Section 31, which outlined the timeline for Earth's formal absorption into the Empire. I wouldn't sign this if you wrote it in gold on the surface of the moon. I've signed worse contracts with cable companies and regretted it. The answer is no. He wrote, at the bottom of the last page, in handwriting that leaned slightly to the left like it was tired. Counterterms to follow. Sincerely, M. Crew. P.S. Your formatting is excellent. The content is insane. He rolled the pages back into the cylinder and handed it to Sengupta. Send it back. You can't send it back. I just did. You're the delivery mechanism. Go. Sengupta went, not because she agreed, because she had learned in 2 days what it had taken Earth's Joint Diplomatic Council 6 months to figure out. Arguing with Maddox's crew was like arguing with weather. You could object to it. You could not change it. She delivered the cylinder to Vesk, who opened it, read the first 3 margin notes, and stood very still for a long time. This is not a counteroffer, Vesk said. No, Sengupta agreed. This is a man writing no in pen on a legal document. Yes. Does he understand what happens if these terms are not accepted? Sengupta paused. She thought about Crew sitting by the window, watching a dead star spin, writing rude things in the margins of his species' death warrant. She thought about the way his hands never shook, not because he was steady, because whatever had once made them shake had already done its worst years ago. He understands, she said. Vesk took the cylinder. He left without the usual Urathi formalities. Sengupta noted that. A break in protocol. The first crack. She went back to the quarters and found Crew where she had left him, watching the star. Something's happening, she said. Something I don't have clearance for. Crew said nothing. 3 delegations pulled their ambassadors out of the station this morning, not because of the war, because of something in our classified military file. A flag in the assembly database. I don't have access to it, but they do, and whatever they saw made them leave. Crew reached for his cigarettes. Maddox, what's in the file? He lit the cigarette. The lighter clicked twice. The flame caught. The smoke went up. Do you know where a man can get decent coffee on this station? He said. That Bravari machine hates me. I think it's personal. Sengupta stood in the doorway and felt the floor shift under her in a way that had nothing to do with the station's gravity generators. Something was in that file. Something Crew already knew about. Something bad enough to make species who had survived 4,000 years of galactic politics pack their bags and run. And the man responsible for humanity's survival was worried about coffee. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him. She wanted to go home to a planet that might not exist in 72 hours and stand on solid ground and feel something that was not this specific, precise, maddening helplessness. Instead, she sat down because there was nowhere else to go. Crew smoked. The neutron star spun. Somewhere in the station's data systems, a classified file sat open like a mouth. And the galaxy was reading it. And the galaxy was afraid. Crew was not afraid. That, Sengupta was beginning to understand, was the scariest part. The Kefani were the oldest species in the assembly. Not the most powerful, not the most numerous, not the most anything except old. They had been keeping records since before the Urathi Empire learned to make fire. Their archivists were living databases, beings so ancient that their bodies had become mostly translucent, like paper held up to light. And their minds had long ago stopped thinking in words and started thinking in patterns. The chief archivist's name translated roughly as the one who has counted everything and found the total disappointing. It summoned Crew to the archive on the third day. The archive was the quietest place on the station. It occupied an entire wing, and the air inside tasted like old books, even though there were no books. Just light-encoded data columns that rose from floor to ceiling like frozen pillars of rain. The Cathani had recorded every species' history, every war, every treaty, every extinction. 4,000 years of galactic civilization, filed and cross-referenced and quietly judged. Crew walked in, smoking. The archivist looked at the cigarette with the expression of a being that had catalogued 10,000 toxic habits across 900 species, and was no longer capable of surprise. "You are the human representative," the archivist said. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like a thought you could hear. "That's what they tell me. I have reviewed your species file. I have questions." Most people do. The archivist moved, or rather it was in one place and then it was in another, the way light moves when you are not paying attention to it. Data columns around them began to glow. Images formed, charts, timelines, maps. "I have called a closed session of the Assembly's senior delegations," the archivist said. 22 species, the Yarathi, have been invited. "I wish to present your species' psychological profile before the war proceeds." Crew raised an eyebrow. "My psychological profile? Your species' profile. Though I suspect the distinction, in your case, is academic." The session convened in a sealed chamber below the archive. 22 delegations, the most senior and most powerful in the assembly. The Yarathi Imperator attended by holographic projection, his crystalline form shimmering in the center of the room like a chandelier that had opinions. Sengupta sat beside Crew. She had been briefed on nothing. She had slept 4 hours in 3 days. Her uniform was still pressed. Her eyes were not. The archivist began. "I present to the Assembly a behavioral analysis of species 4217, Homo sapiens, native to a mid-range terrestrial world in an unremarkable spiral arm." The data columns shifted. Earth appeared, blue, small, turning slowly in projected light. "Admitted to the Assembly 11 months ago. Technological classification, pre-threshold. Military classification, negligible. Diplomatic classification, pending." The archivist paused. "Psychological classification, unresolved." The room shifted. 22 delegations leaned forward, or performed their species equivalent. "The standard model for species response to existential military threat follows a predictable curve," the archivist continued. Data filled the air, graphs, patterns, 900 species worth of behavioral data compressed into clean lines. Initial resistance, proportional to military capability. Negotiation, once the power imbalance is understood. Capitulation, once the cost of resistance exceeds the cost of submission. This model has held for 4,000 years across every documented species. The lines converged. Every species followed the same curve. Every single one. Homo sapiens do not follow this model. The graphs changed. Earth's line went somewhere else entirely. It did not curve toward capitulation. It did not curve at all. It went straight, and then it went up, and it kept going up past the point where every other species line had broken downward. When faced with overwhelming military force, the archivist said, "Humans do not calculate the cost of resistance versus submission. They calculate the cost of resistance versus the cost of being the species that submitted. These are not the same calculation. For most species, survival is the highest value. For humans, Survival without autonomy is categorized as a form of death. The Imperator's projection flickered. Impatience. Many species resist. They are conquered regardless. Yes, the archivist said. But those species resist with the goal of winning. Humans resist with the goal of ensuring that conquest is more expensive than it is worth. They do not fight to survive. They fight to make the act of killing them so costly that it becomes a net loss for the aggressor. This is a strategy with no survival benefit. It is, by any rational analysis, insane. The archivist pulled up new data. Earth's military history. The room went quiet in a way that had texture. In their most recent global conflict, a war they call the Second World War, a single nation-state chose to destroy two of its own enemies' cities using weapons that split the atom itself. Not to conquer, to end a war faster. Images formed. Crew did not look at them. He had seen them before. The weapons killed approximately 200,000 individuals in seconds. The species then spent the next 80 years building more of these weapons, thousands more, and pointing them at each other. The Sylvari delegate made a sound. It was involuntary. Not at external threats, the archivist clarified, at themselves. Humans aimed world-ending weapons at their own species for 8 decades. They called this strategy mutually assured destruction. They abbreviated it. They made jokes about the abbreviation. 3 delegations stood and left the chamber. They did not explain why. They did not need to. The Urathi Empire has conquered species with nuclear capability before, the Imperator said. His voice was steady, but his projection had stopped flickering, which meant he was paying close attention. This is not unprecedented. Those species, the archivist said, built nuclear weapons to threaten their enemies. They built them as tools of leverage. When the leverage failed, they surrendered the weapons. The data shifted. Humans did not build these weapons as leverage. They built weapons they knew would also kill themselves, and they considered that feature acceptable. The weapon's ability to destroy the user was not a flaw in the design. It was the design. Silence. I have studied 900 species, the archivist said. I have catalogued every war, every rebellion, every last stand in galactic history. No other species has independently invented a word for the concept of destroying yourself to destroy your enemy, and then use that word in casual conversation. Humans have several such words, in multiple languages. The archivist turned to the Imperator's projection. Its ancient, translucent face held no expression. It did not need one. The data was the expression. They are not brave, Imperator. Bravery implies a calculation, a decision to face fear for a reward. This species does not calculate. They simply have not finished being angry about things that happened to them before you arrived. Your war is to them an interruption. Crew sat through the entire presentation. He did not speak. He did not flinch. He smoked his cigarette down to the filter, and then held the dead stub between his fingers, like a man holding the string of a balloon that had already gone. Sengupta watched him. She watched him watch his own species get dissected by the oldest intelligence in the galaxy, laid open like a patient on a table, every ugly and magnificent thing about humanity pulled out and held up to the light. The nuclear arsenals, the trench warfare, the last stands and the suicide missions, and the centuries of killing each other over lines drawn on maps. She realized something. He was not embarrassed. He was not proud. He was just tired. The way you get tired of a truth you have known for a long time, a truth about yourself that you cannot change and have stopped trying to. The session ended. The Imperator's projection vanished without a word. Crew stood up, stretched. His back made a sound like an old door. That was educational. The fleet is still mobilizing, Sengupta said. The archivist's presentation didn't stop anything. Wasn't supposed to. Then what was the point? Crew looked at her. That half-second thing moved behind his eyes again. The shadow of the shadow. The point, he said, was to make sure that when this is over, nobody gets to say they didn't know what we are. He walked out. Sengupta followed. The corridor outside the archive was busier than it should have been. Attachés from a dozen species, pretending to be going somewhere, watching the humans pass. 3 previously neutral species opened back-channel communications with Earth's delegation that evening. Not alliances, not promises. Just a line of communication where there hadn't been one before. Like people leaving their doors unlocked in a neighborhood where something large and unpredictable had just moved in. Not because they trusted it, because they wanted to know when it moved. The HFY War fleet entered Sol system on the 5th day. 12,000 ships. The number arrived in Sengupta's briefing like a medical diagnosis. Clinical, precise, and impossible to negotiate with. Each red dot was a HFY warship. The screen looked like it had a rash. "We need to evacuate the delegation," she said. Crew was sitting in his chair by the window. The neutron star was behind him. He was holding a piece of paper. Not a datapad, not a holographic brief, but an actual piece of paper that had been transmitted from Earth's government via the diplomatic channel and printed on the station's one functioning human-compatible printer, which had jammed twice. "We're not evacuating," he said. "The fleet is 6 hours from Earth." "I know. Maddox, there's nothing between that fleet and our planet. Nothing. Our 90 ships are a speed bump. They're not even a speed bump. They're a stain on the road where a speed bump used to be." Crew read the piece of paper one more time, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, next to the cigarettes. "I need the assembly floor," he said. "Every delegation." "For what?" Earth's formal response. Sengupta stared at him. "Earth sent a formal response? When?" "Just now. I'm holding it." "What does it say?" "It says I get to use my own words, which is either the bravest or the dumbest thing Earth's government has ever done, and I've seen them do both." The assembly convened within the hour. Emergency session. Full broadcast to every member world. The chamber was fuller than it had been for the declaration. Word had spread, and species that hadn't attended an assembly session in decades had sent representatives. The Kithani archivist was there, standing in the back like a pillar of pale light. The HFY Imperator attended in person this time, not by projection. His crystalline form filled the center of the floor and threw fractured light across every surface. Crew walked to the speaker's platform. He was carrying nothing except the piece of paper and his cigarettes. He looked at the assembly. 900 species, thousands of delegates, the combined weight of galactic civilization staring at a 58-year-old man in a bad suit. He lit a cigarette. The Bravari delegation started coughing on principle. "My name is Maddox Crew," he said. "I'm the Consul General of the human delegation, which means I'm the one who has to stand here and talk to you while my planet has 6 hours left, so I'll be brief." He took a drag. Let the smoke out slow. "I'm not going to beg. You've seen that before, and I'm told it doesn't work. I'm not going to threaten, because I've got 90 ships and the Imperator has 12,000, and I can do math. I'm not going to make a speech about the beauty of human civilization, or the value of our art, or the light we bring to the galaxy, because honestly, have you seen our art? Half of it is soup cans. We're a strange species. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." A murmur ran through the chamber. Not translation errors, interest. "What I'm going to do is tell you a story. A short one." He pulled the piece of paper from his pocket, looked at it, put it back. 18 months ago, Earth's government received intelligence. Don't ask me how. I don't know and I don't want to. That the HFY Empire was considering military expansion into our region of space. We hadn't been contacted yet. We hadn't been threatened. We just saw the fleet movements and did the math. He paused, tapped Ash. Our math told us we couldn't win a war. 90 ships. You know this. I know this. The Imperator knows this. So our government made a decision. The chamber was very quiet now. We built 12 relativistic kill vehicles. It went from attentive to something else. Something with a heartbeat. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept, and I hope that's most of you, because it's not a concept that should exist, a relativistic kill vehicle is a very simple machine. It's a dense object, very dense, launched at a significant fraction of the speed of light. It has no weapons. It has no warhead. It doesn't need one. At 90% of light speed, a chunk of metal the size of a school bus carries more kinetic energy than most of your species have words for. Crew looked at the Imperator. We built 12. We aimed them at 14 Yarathi core worlds, and then we launched them. The chamber erupted, not into noise, into movement. Delegations turning to each other. Translators overloading. The Selvari delegate gripped the edge of his console. The Kathani archivist did not move. It had, Sengupta suspected, already known. His exoskeleton caught the light and held it. They were launched 18 months ago, Crew continued. His voice had not changed. It had the same flat, tired quality it always had. A man reading weather reports. They are currently in transit. They cannot be recalled. They have no communication systems. They have no guidance systems that can be remotely accessed. They cannot be intercepted by any technology in the Yarathi arsenal, because they are moving too fast, and they are too small, and there are too many of them. 12 vehicles, 14 targets, overlapping trajectories for the two most populated worlds. He took another drag. Their estimated time of arrival at the first Yarathi core world is 6 months from now, give or take a week. I'm told the math is good, but space is big, and things happen. His voice was a low harmonic that the translator rendered as dangerously calm. You are telling me, the Imperator said, that your species launched world-killing weapons at my empire 18 months ago. Before any declaration. Before any contact. Yes. Without warning. Yes. Without negotiation. Crew looked at him. The cigarette had burned down to his fingers. He did not seem to notice. Imperator, he said, we pointed nuclear weapons at ourselves for 80 years and called it foreign policy. Did you think we'd show you more courtesy than we showed each other? The chamber held its breath again. But this time the silence was not confusion. It was the sound of 900 species recalculating everything they thought they knew about the small blue planet in the unremarkable spiral arm. Sengupta sat in her chair and felt the world rearrange itself. The jokes, the cigarettes, the crossed-out treaty, the man reading a newspaper during a declaration of war. None of it was bravery. None of it was madness. It was a man sitting in a room where the fuse had already been lit, watching it burn, because there was nothing left to do but wait, and he had decided to wait comfortably. He had known, since before he took the post. He had been chosen for this, not because he was brave, not because he was clever, but because he was a man who could sit in front of an alien emperor and shrug while the clock ran out, and not because he didn't care, but because he had already cared about worse things and survived them, and there was nothing left in him that the Yarathi could reach. She grabbed him in the corridor afterward. Her hands were shaking. His were not. You knew. Yes. The whole time. Before you took this job. You knew what we'd launched. Yes. And you just sat there, making jokes, arguing with a vending machine. Crew reached for his cigarettes, stopped, looked at his hand. For the first time in 5 days, something crossed his face that was not composure. It was fast, and it was gone, and Sengupta almost missed it. Exhaustion, not physical. The kind you carry like a stone in your chest. The kind that comes from knowing what you are, and what your species is, and carrying that knowledge around, while smiling at aliens, and asking about coffee. I wasn't going to tell them, Priya. Earth gave me the choice. The speech, the reveal, that was my call made 30 minutes ago. I was supposed to just keep shrugging until the math did its work. Why did you tell them? He lit the cigarette. His hands were steady again. Whatever had been there was gone, sealed back behind the wall that Maddox's crew had built inside himself long before the aliens showed up. Because the Imperator has 6 months to save his worlds, and I am a lot of things, but I am not the man who watches 14 planets die because nobody told them to move. He walked away. Smoke behind him. Sengupta's communicator buzzed. A private channel request. The Urathi Imperator wanted to speak with crew. Alone. No scripts, no delegations, no assembly. For the first time in the story, the Imperator was not performing. Something had gotten through that crystalline shell. Something sharp and human-shaped, and Sengupta did not know if that was a good thing or the most dangerous thing that had happened yet. The sealed chamber was small by assembly standards. No gallery, no delegation seating, no broadcast equipment. Just a round table made of something dark and heavy that might have been wood if wood grew on neutron star stations. 2 chairs, and a translation device that sat between them like a nervous mediator. Crew walked in first. He sat down, put his cigarettes on the table. There were 3 left in the pack. He had started the week with a full carton. 5 days of galactic diplomacy had cost him approximately 200 cigarettes, which he reflected was fewer than his second divorce, but more than the congressional hearing. The Imperator entered. Without the assembly floor, without the ritual space and the galleries and the fractured light, Solvan Kethur was something different. Smaller was not the word. He was still 8 feet of crystalline exoskeleton, but the performance was gone. The theater had been left at the door. What walked in was a leader who had just learned that his empire's 14 most populated worlds were 6 months away from becoming debris fields. And the only person who could help him was a tired man with a cigarette habit. He sat. The chair had been built for Urathi physiology. It held him the way a throne holds a king, with the assumption that he belonged there. Your species, the Imperator said, launched weapons of total destruction at my worlds before we ever spoke to you. Yes, before any threat was made. We saw the fleet movements. We did not wait for the speech. You understand that this is an act of war. Crew almost smiled. Almost. I believe you already declared war on us. We're just ahead of schedule. The translation device hummed. The Imperator was silent for a long time. When Urathi were silent, their exoskeletons dimmed. The light that usually ran through them in bright veins faded to something low and steady, like coals in a dying fire. Kethur dimmed now, thinking. Can you recall them? He asked. And there it was, the only question that mattered. 5 days of speeches and terms and psychological profiles and assembly theater, and it all came down to a simple yes or no in a small room. No, Crew said. Your government cannot deactivate them remotely. They were built without a recall function. The Imperator's exoskeleton flickered, a crack in the composure, brief, bright, then gone. Every weapon has a failsafe. Every species builds a way to stop what they have started. Most species do, Crew agreed. He picked up a cigarette, did not light it yet, held it between his fingers the way a conductor holds a baton before the music starts. We chose not to. Because we learned, through long and very bloody experience, that any weapon with an off switch will eventually be switched off by someone who shouldn't have access to the panel. He paused. Let that sit. Our nuclear weapons had off switches, launch codes, command chains, kill protocols, and for 80 years we lived in terror that someone would use them, and also in terror that the wrong someone would disable them. The kill vehicles have no codes, no command chain, no off switch. They are rocks moving at 90% of the speed of light, and they are as negotiable as gravity. Then your species has committed an act of irreversible aggression against the Yarathi Empire. Yes. And you sit here and tell me this with no apparent remorse. Crew lit the cigarette. The lighter clicked. The flame was small. The smoke went up. Imperator, I have a great deal of remorse about many things. I have remorse about my first marriage and my third marriage, and a thing I said to my daughter in 2019 that I will carry to my grave. I have remorse about the way my species built these weapons, and I have remorse about the fact that I understand why they did it. But remorse doesn't change trajectories, not emotional ones and not ballistic ones. He leaned back. The chair was not comfortable. Nothing on this station was comfortable. He had stopped noticing. The kill vehicles have a flight time of 30 months. They launched 18 months ago. That gives you 12 months of transit remaining, and approximately 6 months before the first vehicle reaches its target. But you don't need to stop them. The Imperator's exoskeleton brightened. Attention. You need to move what's in their way. Crew reached into his jacket and pulled out a data chip, human-made, clumsy by galactic standards, the kind of thing a species with 11 months of interstellar experience would produce. This chip contains the exact trajectories of all 12 kill vehicles. Speed, vector, mass, current position calculated to a margin of error my people assure me is very small. Your fleet, those 12,000 ships sitting outside our solar system, has the engineering capability to build deflection systems, gravity tractors, kinetic redirectors. Your technology is centuries ahead of ours. My people did the math. If you start now, you can move the vehicle's paths enough to miss your core worlds by a comfortable margin. You are offering me the trajectories, I'm offering you a trade. Silence. The kind that negotiators live inside. The space between the offer and the answer, where entire civilizations pivot. Earth gets a full seat on the Galactic Assembly. Not row 874. A real seat, with voting rights, veto capability, and a delegate parking space that isn't next to the ventilation ducts. Species sovereignty in perpetuity. No genetic licensing, no cultural submission, no population controls, no biological archiving. The Yarathi fleet withdraws from human space permanently, and you officially, publicly, on the assembly floor, rescind the declaration of war. You are asking me to surrender. I'm asking you to redirect 12,000 warships to an engineering project that saves your own worlds. I'm giving you the information to do it. All I want in return is for you to leave us alone. This is extortion. Crew took a drag. Let the smoke curl around the word. It's Tuesday. He was 8 feet tall, and his exoskeleton blazed with light. The Yarathi expression of fury, or frustration, or something that existed between the two in a place that human language could not reach. He stood over Crew like a cathedral standing over a man on a bench, and Crew looked up at him the way a man on a bench looks at a cathedral, with respect for the architecture, and no intention of going inside. Your species, the Imperator said, is a disease. We've been called worse, mostly by each other. You have made yourselves into something the galaxy cannot afford to fight and cannot afford to trust. You are not allies, you are not enemies. You are a cost that is not worth paying. I'll take it, Crew said. The Imperator turned, walked to the door, stopped. I accept your terms. He said it without turning around. He said it to the door, or to the station, or to the 4,000 years of imperial history that had just run into something it could not conquer. Not because it was strong, but because it had already decided that destruction was an acceptable outcome, and had built that decision into metal and launched it into the dark. He left. Crew sat alone in the sealed chamber. The cigarette burned between his fingers. The translation device hummed softly, processing nothing, waiting for words that did not come. He finished the cigarette, set the stub on the table next to the data chip. looked at them both, the dead thing and the thing that would save 14 worlds. And they were the same size, and they sat on the same table, and neither of them meant anything by themselves. He stood. His back made its sound. His suit was wrinkled. His hair was doing what it always did. He walked out. Sengupta was waiting in the corridor. Her face was the face of a woman who had been standing outside a closed door, holding the weight of a species' future, and had not been able to hear what was happening inside. "Is it over?" she asked. Crew reached for his cigarettes. 2 left. He pulled one out, looked at it. He didn't light it. He stood at the viewport instead. The neutron star spun beyond the glass, collapsing, burning, throwing light in pulses that would continue long after every empire in the galaxy had forgotten its own name. The station orbited it in silence. The corridor was empty. The assembly was quiet. The war was over. The war was over, and humanity had won, and the taste of it was smoke in an empty room. He put the cigarette between his lips, still did not light it. Sengupta watched him. She saw the mask slip, not triumph, not relief, but something older and heavier. The look of a man who had just proven the galaxy right about his species, who had sat in a room and used the threat of 14 dead worlds to buy humanity a seat at the table, and who understood, in the specific way that only tired men understand things, that this was not the kind of victory you celebrated. It was the kind you carried. "Maddox," she said. He looked at her. The unlit cigarette hung from his lip. His eyes were the color of smoke, or exhaustion, or the space between what you did and what you wished you'd done. "I'm going to find that coffee," he said. He walked down the corridor. The neutron star threw light across the viewport behind him, catching his shadow, stretching it long across the floor. A thin, tired shape moving away from the window, moving towards something as small and ordinary as a cup of coffee on a station orbiting a dead star. The cigarette stayed unlit. That was new. Sengupta watched him go and thought about what the archivist had said, that humans were not brave, that they were simply not finished being angry about things that happened before the aliens arrived. She thought maybe the archivist had gotten it slightly wrong. They were not angry. They were just very, very tired. And tired species, like tired men, do not start fights. But they build things in the dark that make sure they never have to lose one. And they send their most broken person to hold the door, because the broken ones are the only ones who can sit in a room where everything is falling apart and feel at home. Crew turned a corner and was gone. The station hummed. The star spun. The galaxy adjusted to the presence of something new at its table, small and strange, and not finished yet, still building things in the dark, still lighting cigarettes in places where they shouldn't, still carrying the weight of what they were, with the tired grace of a species that had learned, long ago, that the only unforgivable thing was to kneel. The cigarette stayed unlit. It meant something. She was not sure what.